Right. I'm going to thank you for the invitation to share my work with you and to show how important is mitochondrial activity in the aging progression and cellular dysfunction. I'm going to share some different aspects of mitochondrial activity during aging, and also I'm going to focus on the importance of mitochondria in the immune system to know what happened in aged people that cannot respond properly to the infections from different pathogens and so on. So, okay, you know how is mitochondrial. This is the typical way we show mitochondria with the cristae, with the matrix size, with the two membranes. But mitochondria is not like this in cells because it's a typical electron microscopy image that seems to show a single organelle, but mitochondria is more complex. It's like this. It's a very, very dynamic organelle that change the shape of the mitochondria depending on the need or the need of the need of the cells. If they are very active, for example, they show this branched structure, but if they are damaged mitochondria, they look like small balls here, small points that are going to be eliminated. Also, the crystal structures change a lot because if you need more energy, the mitochondria show a high amount of crystal, but if you don't need it, the crystal are lower because this is very active organelle in the cell that is changing a lot depending on the needs of the cells. Also, everybody knows that mitochondria is involved in the production of ATP, production of energy in the cells. But mitochondria is also a central organelle in the control or the whole homeostasis of cells, because it regulates also the lipids and carbohydrate metabolism, and control the production, for example, of some of the phospholipids that are in the membranes of the cells, and then is controlling the production of new membrane in the cells. Also is controlling the fluxes in calcium and in cytosol, and that is very important in the control of signaling into the cells. And other function of the mitochondria is the regulation of apoptosis. So it's central in many, many aspects of the cells, and it's not only to produce ATP, it's producing other things. For example, in tumor cells, mitochondria is not used to produce ATP. They are working to produce metabolites that are needed for the cell to grow, to replicate. They are working to produce ATP. They are working to in an anabolic pathway. Okay, what happened with mitochondria? In this aspect of mitochondria, that it is working in a dynamic process. Mitochondria, they change the shape and the structure depending on the need. So in a balanced mitochondrial activity, I don't know if I make a control. Okay, right. In a balanced activity of the mitochondria, you can see that there are some proteins like mitofusin 1 and 2, OPA1, and PHP that are changing the shape to a large mitochondrial structure. But if they don't need a lot of energy, some other proteins like DRP1 and FISH1 that are fission proteins, so changing the shape to a smaller structure. So it's very dynamic. If this pathway is working, mitochondria is healthy, and then is responding to the different needs of the cells. But what happens in aging? In aging, we can find that the mitochondria are very big, and then accumulate a lot of structure inside, and then they are not efficient because the fission process in mitochondria is decreasing, and some researchers think that those mitochondria are like this, giant mitochondria, because they cannot respond properly to the needs of the cells, and then they accumulate a structure, big structure, to produce enough energy, but also produce a lot of radicals in the cell and produce oxidative damage. Also, the turnover of the mitochondria is needed, so you have to remove the damaged mitochondria in the cells, and there's another pathway. Use the bottom that mitochondria are activate the fission process, and then a small mitochondria are taken by mitophagy and autophagy processes, and then can be eliminated from the cells. But in some cases, like obesity or like mitochondria and metabolic syndrome, the fat accumulation block this process, and then the cell accumulates small and unaffected mitochondria, and then we can also find a mitochondrial dysfunction. All those processes, all those processes are associated with many different diseases that are associated with aging, like cardiovascular disease, type 2 diabetes, hypercholesterolemia, hypertension, sarcopenia, neurodegenerative diseases, etc. So it's clear that the mitochondrial dysfunction is associated with aging and also with many age-associated diseases. So it seems clear that in aging, we have to focus, at least one part of the studies had to focus on the accumulation of damaged mitochondria. Here we can see the simple image of a healthy mitochondria that is producing ATP and less free radicals, and damaged mitochondria that are producing low ATP and also a higher amount of free radicals. The free radical theory of aging is a theory that is always there, because some people say, okay, they cannot explain everything, but it's always that and there, because in aging you can find that accumulation of oxidative stress and oxidative damage is there. It's always there, and in senescent cells you can find a lot of oxidative damage structure. So mitochondria, it could be in the center, or any a lot of diseases associated with aging, and also with metabolic syndromes or metabolic diseases or related diseases like diabetes, like metabolic syndrome, liver damage, and also other problems like cardiomyopathy, sarcopenia, and the dementia, because the function of mitochondria is essential to the function of any cells in the organism, and this is clear why mitochondria is important in aging. Here, there's another important aspect of mitochondria, because I don't know if you know that now in aging they are focusing on the elimination of senescent cells as a therapeutic mechanism to reduce or to reduce the progression of aging, because there's some researchers think that the accumulation of senescent cells is one of the main aspects in aging, and then if you remove those cells, you can reduce also the problems associated with aging. But mitochondria is also there, because in some of the vesicles that those senescent cells release to the media, and can produce some response of the neighborhood cells, you can find also mitochondria there. And it seems that in those vesicles, mitochondria can be involved in at least in the deterioration of the surrounding cells. So mitochondria is also in this aspect, and we can focus also mitochondria in this aspect. So what is more or less the idea of the importance of mitochondrial disease in aging? Why we have aging and different speeds in different organs, and then in those organs accumulate cells that are releasing some vesicles that can increase the senescence and also increase damage in the tissue that are associated with the progression of age. And mitochondria is used in the center of everything of this. Okay, our group is working on one of the factors that are involved, strongly involved in the health of mitochondria. This is coenzyme Q10. I think you know that coenzyme Q10 in the case of humans, because I have 10 isoprene units in the tail, is one of the factors that are involved in the electron transport chain. And this is a very important factor, because this molecule that is a lipid molecule gets electrons from complex 1 and 2, and then pass the electrons to complex 3, and then to oxygen through complex 4 with the work of cytochrome C. So it's a center factor, because it's not only involved in this pathway, but it is also involved in other metabolic pathways like visceral 3-phosphate dehydrogenase or dehydroorotate or dehydrogenase that is producing nucleotides, and also in other metabolic processes like the metabolism of some amino acids, and also some modification of the proteins, and also in beta oxidation. So coenzyme Q is in the center of the metabolism of mitochondria, and our work is working on different aspects of mitochondria, and we also know that coenzyme Q in other membranes, not only mitochondria, also in mitochondria, but in other membranes, is also important to prevent lipid peroxidation. And lipid peroxidation has been associated with some kind of apoptosis known now as ferroptosis, that is associated with aging, because ferroptosis is only a kind of cell death that is associated with the accumulation of lipid peroxidation, and then the cell death associated with oxidative stress and oxidative damage. In those membranes, coenzyme Q gets electrons from different reductases and maintain a cycle with other antioxidants like alpha-tocopherol or ascorbate to prevent oxidative stress. And there's a lot of pathways that can be controlled by those reductases that depends on the presence of coenzyme Q in the membrane. Our group is working normally, a branch or a group is working on the deficiency of coenzyme Q, because there's some people that show deficiency in the synthesis of coenzyme Q. And then we have found that there's a lot of problem with those, especially our children that have a lot of problems, normally ataxia and kidney diseases. And we have found that the deficiency of coenzyme Q accelerates the the elimination, or at least the mitophagy of the mitochondria, because in those cases mitochondrial damage is accumulated, and then those mitochondria has to be removed. This is important because there are several diseases associated with mitochondrial dysfunction that are associated with the increase in the needs of the cell to activate mitophagy. But this activation and this chronic autophagy system at the end is damaging the cells and then produce several problems. So we know now that in some cases, supplying coenzyme Q10 to humans, we can at least reduce the severity of the disease. And it's clear, there's several studies that have demonstrated that this supplementation with coenzyme Q10 can reduce the damage in cardiovascular disease, not only in the heart, but also in the endothelium to reduce the damage. Also, some cases of neurodegenerative diseases, kidney diseases, and also metabolic syndrome and diabetes. We have found some aspects with aging, at least to maintain health during aging, and also in inflammation. And this, I'm going to focus this in this aspect of inflammation, because one of the main aspects that are accumulated in aging is a chronic inflammation. During aging, the biomarkers associated with inflammatory cytokines are increasing. And this chronic inflammation, low degree of chronic inflammation, can be very important in the progression of aging, because at least inflammation at the end produce damage, or at least accumulate damage structure in the organism. So during the lockdown 1 year ago, 1.5 years ago, we were thinking about, okay, why only in old people and people with metabolic syndrome, all the groups that suffer more the infection with this virus? Why those groups respond in this way that produce pneumonia and produce a very big inflammatory response? I'm working also in some aspects of inflammation, some aspects of immunity. And then I think you know, but only to remember, in immunity we have two parts that we used to study that, but those parts are very, very, very connected. And then the one part is we know innate immunity, that is the components of cells like phagocytes that engulf bacterium and NK cells in the group of lymphocytes that kill damaged cells, even infected by virus. There's another lymphocyte cells that are in mucosa that are very interesting, but I'm not going to show that here. Also the complement, and also an important factor, that interferon, because interferon is a cytokine that reduce the capacity of the virus to progress into the cells, so to proliferate, to produce the components of the virus, because interferon is very important. I'm going to talk about that in the next slides. And also in the acquired immunity, we found the antibodies. Everybody knows antibodies or proteins that bind to the virus, block them, and then don't make the virus to infect cells, and also some other proteins, also the lymphocytes that are for me, it's the most important response to virus, because lymphocyte T and cytotoxic lymphocyte T are the first barrier to attack the infected cells. And this is very important in this response of the immune system. What's happened with the COVID in the case of infection with the SARS-CoV-2? So we know the virus enters the cells, binds to the ACE2 protein, and then introduce the genome into the cells, and this genome but is used to produce more proteins and to assemble the protein and then produce more virus. They affect more the respiratory virus, they affect more the respiratory system, and if the virus invites lungs, it produces pneumonia. The stronger response to this infection is when this immune system produces enormous amounts of cytokines, especially cytokines like TNF-alpha and interferon gamma, that produce a cycle of cytokines release that we know now as cytokine storm. And this response, not only lungs, because lungs are responding in an inflammation process, and then the lungs lose the capacity to get oxygen from the air, but also this cytokine storm affects other organs like liver, kidney, brain, vessels into the cells, into the organism, and then can produce at the end an organ failure, multi-organ failure. This is the main aspect. So to reduce the severity of the infection, we have to reduce the release of the cytokines, and then avoid this cytokine storm, and then a virus can reduce the severity. So during the pandemic, several studies have been performed on this, but we know that there was some other infection with virus similar to the SARS, that are like the first SARS-CoV-1, that we know that if we reduce the severity of the inflammatory response, we can reduce the severity of the disease, and then reduce the death. So at the end, it's a kind of balance of the response. A small inflammatory response can produce a balanced activity of the immune system that ends in a protective immunity and then the survival of the host. But an unbalanced activity of the disease can produce inflammation and then the death. And this is what's happened with those groups that are sensible, like AIDS people, and then like metabolic syndrome affected people, that at the end have a very accumulation of inflammatory monocytes into the lungs and then produce inflammation and pneumonia. So as I told you, we were working on this. We were thinking about why those groups, and then we know that mitochondrial disease, mitochondrial dysfunction is involved in this response. We know that H mitochondria and also damaged mitochondria produce radicals, has accumulated mutation, deregulated the activity of the exotransfer chains, and then produce damage. There's a reduces ATP production, CoQ levels, and so on. So this ends in a decrease of the release of interferon 1 that produce a low antiviral response. So the system cannot respond to virus. There's an increasing innate response, they are increasing, and then the adaptive response, so the response depending on lymphocytes is decreasing. And this, we know that the people accumulate immunosenescence, and also there's a big activity of inflammation, and then the release of inflammatory cytokines like TNF-alpha, interleukin-6, 1B, etc. So in each people, the system is ready to produce an inflammatory response because mitochondria does not work. What's also in this inflammation, mitochondrial dynamics is also involved. And then there's an accumulation of fissionated mitochondria that decrease the production ATP, and also decrease the capacity of the cells to produce energy that needs to respond to the infection. In this aspect, mitochondrial activity is very important in the maintenance of the activity of one big structure in those cells that is called the inflammasome. The inflammasome needs to be produced in these two steps. One step is the priming step that is depending on the signaling that are required in the cells, like pro-inflammatory cytokines like interleukin 1B and TNF-alpha, then produce activation of NF-κB, and then they produce the activity and the synthesis of the components of the inflammasome. In a second step, so when in this case, in one people that is 8 people, and also in metabolic syndrome in affected people, those this system is activated, and the cells can accumulate already ready inflammation there. So when a virus arrives, or in the presence of damaged mitochondria, all those signals ends in the oligomerization of inflammation, and then the release of more cytokines, and then produce the inflammatory response. So in people suffering metabolic syndrome and H people, this system is already, and when the virus arrives, this system is activated very quickly. So the inflammation is very quick. So it's very active. This is one of the main aspects. In this case, mitochondrial dysfunction, accumulation of mitochondrial and damaged mitochondria into the cells, is involved both in the activation of the inflammation and also in the release of cytokines that are activating the production of more inflammation. So it's a kind of vicious cycle of mitochondria producing more activity of the inflammatory response. And in fact, in aging and also in inflammation release, and in the release of some components that are involved in the activity of those inflammatory response. So hence in several diseases like cardiovascular disease, like diabetes, like inflammation in the adipose tissue, etc., that ends in the more insulin resistant, that is type 2 diabetes, that is also associated with H people, then produce the release of more components that activate at the same time more inflammation. So this is a vicious cycle, very important in this kind of response. I think I'm going to part. So now we know that the mitochondria is in the center of this response that can be involved in this kind of infection, but in other infections. You have to remember that H people are the target group that suffer a lot of problems, respiratory problems, with any kind of virus or respiratory virus, even flu, even other kind of virus. So in resume of that, but aging accumulate chronic inflammation, produce the release of cytokines that they end in the accumulation of inflammation, that is always active. And mitochondrial dysfunction is involved in this accumulation. When people receive infection of any virus, this inflammation is activated quickly and then produce cytokine storm that can be associated with the aging. But also, this inflammation is also ready to respond to the virus because inflammations are active with virus, especially with double standard RNA virus. The coronavirus are a single standard plus RNA virus, but to produce more genome, more structure, they need to produce a double standard RNA formation, and then this system activates the inflammation and then can produce the system. And also, there's another important aspect involving the response that some viruses are able to reduce the response of interferon. As I told you, the interferon is important because interferon reduces the capacity of the virus to replicate into the cells. And then there's a kind of interferon, type 1 interferon. And it has been found that the people suffering type 1 deficiency, so they cannot produce interferon alpha and beta, for example, then the response of the system is reduced. The adaptive system is reduced, and the system that is involved in the inflammation is higher. And in this way, also mitochondria is important because mitochondria contains a protein in the outer membranes I call MAPS that is important to activate the transcription factors that induce the expression of interferon type 1 interferon, especially alpha and beta. So normally in infection with virus, this virus activated MAPS, and then this process activated the production of interferon. But what's happened with when the mitochondria is deficient? So we can think that if mitochondria is accumulating damage and cannot work properly, those signaling can be affected, and in fact it is. So for example, in people in normal conditions, we have a normal response, and MAPS oligomerize into the mitochondria and produce the release of interferon. But when we suffer metabolic syndrome with high glucose, then MAPS cannot oligomerize and then cannot produce the release interferon. So mitochondria is also in the center of the response of interferon that is involved in the proper response to the viral infection. In the case of aging, the same, because in aging we accumulate damaged mitochondria that cannot oligomerize MAPS and then cannot produce a proper activity of the transcription factor, and they can reduce interferon. So we have here more or less the same picture, that deficient mitochondria accumulated into the cells is producing a higher inflammatory response, and at the same time is reducing the release of the cytokines that can block the progression of the activity of the virus into the cells. But even more, some virus has also the property to block the activity of MAPS. So we don't have MAPS active, but also we have a virus, or we suffer the infection of a virus that can block the small amount of MAPS that can be active in this way, though this response to the virus is blocked. And this is not only an aspect of coronavirus, it's also involved, it's involved in other aspects with other viruses, so like hepatitis C and cytomegalovirus. These are also involved in the progression of the disease in H people. also influenza, measles, other virus can do the same. So it's a kind of war. So if you have active mitochondria, you can respond quickly to the infection and then avoid the production of cytokines and so on. But if your mitochondrial deficient, they cannot respond properly, and even more, the infection can reduce the activity of this mitochondria, and then at the end you have an inflammatory response. Also, the virus have demonstrated, sorry for the noise, has demonstrated the capacity to accumulate damaged mitochondria, for example, in some monocytes that are the precursor of macrophages. And also, another important aspect is that it has been demonstrated that the lymphocyte T, or cytotoxic lymphocyte T, needs healthy mitochondria to attack target cells and then to kill them. If the lymphocyte T accumulates damage in mitochondria, they cannot attack properly the target cells, and at the end, they cannot eliminate the infected cells. It has been demonstrated a long time ago, and we know that there's some also in this disease in H people, lymphocyte T are not working properly. And here we have also that this dysfunction mitochondria can be it is an important factor in the multimorbidity in H people and also in the premature senescence in some pathological processes. Well, I am finishing, only a couple of pictures. What can we do with that? So we know that we accumulate damaged mitochondria during aging, we accumulate damaged mitochondria, we know, are not have a metabolic syndrome or have a diabetes or any other imbalance in the metabolism. What can we do? So it has been demonstrated that there's some aspect that we can at least control. That it's use mitochondrial mitoautophagy inducers. I'm going to show you someone that is interesting. Also, in some model of calorie restriction, increase the elimination of damaged mitochondria. The compounds, bioactive compounds as nutrients like polyphenols can work. Physical exercise, that you activate in the cells, they eliminate damaged structures, and then they maintain a proper turnover, levels of constant Q10, and also MID. So the levels of the metabolites into the cells. In this case, you can reduce inflammation, produce an immune response, a balanced immune response, a higher lymphocyte T response, and a high B cell response, so a high adaptive response. In the case of the accumulation of damaged mitochondria, we have the other aspect that is chronic inflammation, immunosenescence, oxy-inflammaging, and then a deficient antiviral response. So at the end, you are exposed to the more severe activity of response to the disease, to the infection, and then to the death. In this case, what can we do? So there's a component that is used in the people that are suffering type 2 diabetes, like metformin. And metformin, interesting, activate mitochondrial turnover and then reduce the activation of inflammation. And this is very interesting. Also, calorie restriction and active components of the diet, like polyphenol. We were working on with resveratrol in all mice liver, and in all mice liver, they accumulate signals of inflammation like COX-2, and then resveratrol was able to reduce COX-2, and then to reduce the assembly of the inflammation in liver, and also in other study, we demonstrated that resveratrol is able to maintain a high turnover of mitochondria, so to reduce damage structure into the cells. And also physical activity. In physical activity, sedentaries reduce everything that is involved in the turnover and in the elimination of damaged mitochondria, and then a moderate and a active activity, better moderate than active, because in the case of high intensity can produce some damage. But in the case of moderate activity, they can maintain the turnover of mitochondria, and then we can remove several problems with in several organs, even in the production of inflammation. So I think with those aspects that I have been talking about, we can now clearly at least understand that mitochondria is in the center of several response of the cells to several signals, and then in the progression of aging. So mitochondria is involved in the metabolic flexibility, the production of ROS, in apoptosis, in the red homeostasis, in the calcium homeostasis, in ATP production, and also in metabolite production. So we can see that mitochondria, maintaining healthy mitochondria, we can at least avoid many aspects associated with aging, and also associated with the response to infection during aging. And here more or less is a indication of the components, and also in the components that are involved in the activation of mitoautophagy, and then to reduce mitochondrial dysfunction. This is all for now. I hope this talk has been interesting for you. This is our center. I would like to end showing our center here in Seville. And here is part of the group that are working on the metabolic diseases associated with the coenzyme Q10 deficiency. And we are here in Sevilla. So if you want to collaborate or to ask something, or to only to think about science, and we can at least help in the progression of the study of aging and metabolism and so on. Thank you very much.
Professor Lopez, how could we protect the mitochondrial function?
Well, I have shown that keeping your body active it's very simple. We are always thinking in therapeutic processes like pills to that, pills to the other. No, it's only maintaining the mitochondria active in some way. So keeping the activity, physical activity, eating properly and balanced and nutrients, and the mind, maintaining the mind active. Also, only to pressure. It's like an homeostasis of the system. It's we call in aging we use the term hormesis, and for mitochondria is working this hormesis. So you have to push the cells a bit to maintain those cells active, and then they eliminate the damage of the mitochondria or other components, and then renew that. This is the only way to maintain the system the most active as possible.
Thank you. We have also one more question in chat. If the high protein from meat affect mitochondria or even the longevity process?
There's several studies that have been focused on some nutrients, only these nutrients, high proteins, high sugars, high fats studies, but this is very unbalanced nutrition. I think the most important is the balance of any component in the nutrition, because we need anything. We need different kind of nutrients. And in the case of high protein diets, that is called the ketogenic diet, okay, that at the end the system adapt to this diet, and is modifying the metabolism to use those amino acids that are very high, and then mitochondria is going to get the component and the metabolites from those pathways that are involved in the glucose pathways. So I think the most important thing is to maintain a balanced nutrition, and also to get anything, vitamins, minerals, carbohydrates, proteins, fats, and then if you think that you are eating a lot or you are consuming a lot of energy in this, so be more active or reduce the amount of nutrients, but in a balanced proportion.
We have also one more questions from Dr. Daniela Stoyan. Some information about glutation supplements and mitochondria status.
Pardon, glutation what?
The question is on the chat. Some information about glutation supplements and mitochondria status.
Good to see.
It is glutathione. Glutathione supplement.
Glutathione. Okay.
Thank you.
Sorry.
I don't know about glutathione supplements. Well, okay, the precursor of glutathione is the N-acetylcysteine, and the study has not demonstrated anything. Glutathione has the function in the cytosol mainly because the glutathione peroxidases are there, and you're using to reduce the oxidative damage. The mitochondria has also, they have also glutathione. I think there's not, it's not clear now that the supplementing compounds that can include glutathione can affect mainly mitochondria, but of course are going to reduce the oxidative damage, because if you have glutathione peroxidase active, the cell are going to use that. But very importantly, in our works with animals, we have found that glutathione peroxidase is reduced during aging. So you can have a lot of glutathione, but at the end, if you don't have an active enzyme, they're not going to use that. So this is a very important aspect.
Thank you very much, Professor.
To you. Thank you. I see, no.
Very interesting, very interesting, and more information. Some words about oxidative stress and generally oxidative process of cellular.
I don't understand the question. Okay, but I think I can respond in some way. I think it's very important to focus on not only in oxidative stress, but also in the capacity of the cells to respond to the production of radicals. We know that the radicals are needed for the cells to maintain the activity or maintain the synthesis of antioxidant enzymes like superoxide dismutase, like glutathione peroxidase, like catalase, like thioredoxins, and so on. And so the cells needs at least a bit of radicals to maintain this activity. The problem is also the balance. If you have released a lot of radicals for any reason, and the system that eliminates all radicals and even the system that eliminate the damage already produced by those radicals, you are going to accumulate damage. At the end, the accumulation of damage is the main problem is in this in aging and also in those diseases. If the cell can eliminate this damage at the end, the same or a ball of a structure that they don't need, but they cannot release. This is one of the main aspects. So it's a kind of balance of the production of radicals and the elimination of radicals and the elimination of damage. And I think we have to focus on the activation of the system that eliminate the damage and also to reduce the accumulation of this damage.
There are some ways for people which can activate mitochondrial biogenesis. At the moment, I read an article about the sun or the cold exposure can activate the mitochondrial biogenesis. Is true or is just a myth?
There's a lot of articles that indicate that mitochondria is activated, but it depends on the system. It depends on the how to discuss this, how to think, okay, the sun, but in which system, and cold. So cold it's a kind of adaptation. So you put cells in a system, the cells try to adapt to this system, and at the end, the cell remodel the organelles depending of the needs. But if you can change the cells, for example, from hypoxia to hyperoxia, so cells are changing and adapting to that. So, and always I talk to my students that in our organism, everything is changing a lot of, along the day. You are sleeping, or metabolism is different. If we are running, or if we are studying, or we are eating. So it depends on the system. I think the main question is the ability of the system to respond to those changes. If you have a very slow capacity to respond to the changes, at the end you have a problem. For example, if you cannot, if your muscle or your fat reduce the capacity to get glucose from the plasma, once you have having a meat, for example, a meal, for example, you accumulate glucose in the plasma because your muscle is not able to accumulate that. And the glucose in the plasma at the end is going to the liver and accumulates there in form of fat. So you have a problem in the liver because your muscle is not able to get enough glucose from the plasma to reduce the level. So it's a kind of how the cells can respond. I think during aging, the capacity to readapt to the conditions is decreasing. But in the whole system, it's decreasing, it's lower. I cannot hear you.
No, I'm just listening, and then I've already think for another question. What is your opinion about caloric restriction for longevity?
Caloric restriction has been a very good model for animals model or organism model, because you take an animal and then put it in with less food and then they respond. The main question is how it works in humans, for example, and then this is a very interesting question because humans are not animals, model animals that in those animals they eat always the same every day, every week, every month. So it's always the same, and we don't eat the same during the year, even during the day, or even during the week. So we change our food continuously, and at least, for example, here in Spain, where we eat low caloric diet during summer because it's very hot, and then we don't need a lot of energy to maintain the temperature, for example. But in winter, we eat more caloric food because it's a bit colder, and then we need more energy to maintain the temperature. But this is not happen with the model. So I think in humans, calorie system is not working properly because our system continually is changing in this way. I think it's more important for us to increase the capacity to consume energy, to waste energy. So it's with the physical activity. I think our main problem as human is the sedentarism. We eat a lot, and in comparison with the energetic needs we have.
No, I don't see no more questions right now. So, Professor Lopez, it was a great honor for me to have your opinion today in our conference. I want to remind that Professor Lopez is one of the top 2% scientists in the world ranked this year. So our honor is a plus because we have as guest speaker in our conference. Thank you very much again, and hope to see you on our next events from the next year.